Creepiest and most terrifying things people have ever experienced. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support us. One time in middle school, my mom and I moved in with this guy who had his house guarded like a fort. One of his safety measures was his motion sensing alarm, which was present only inside the house. They go out one night, and I'm upstairs when the alarm starts going off. I'm probably 11 or 12 at this point. I run downstairs and cling to his dog in the living room. No one comes to get me. I don't actually remember what happened, but it scared the shit out of me. Second, I'm 19 or 20, and my best friend and I are watching scary movies at the end of a night of partying, as we so often did. That night was different only because we got a genuine spook when my boot, by the front door, went from laying on its side to standing straight up. My friend saw it happen. I only heard it, a slight shuffle noise. In a panic, we both stood up, and when we exclaimed, "Did that just happen?" 3 knocks came from my dining room, adjacent to the living room we had been watching movies in. Looking back, some other weird shit happened earlier in the night, but we were a little drunk and wrote it off. Radio turned to different stations when we'd go out to smoke. That experience ended up driving me mad until my boyfriend and I moved from the apartment. I was trying to sleep one night when I was a kid, and after turning off the lights, I heard knocking sounds coming from across the room. There was a wooden shelf there, but nothing else. The knocking was very rhythmic, with the same volume and rhythm as a recording. It was the first time I heard it, and after a while, I got up to check it out. When I turned on the lights, it stopped. I couldn't find anything weird, so I got back in bed. Again, a while after the lights out, it came back, exactly the same as before. Checked again, nothing, back to bed. This time the knocking was more frantic, like much faster paced and maybe a bit louder, but I can't remember. It was definitely more attention grabbing than the first. I would get very grumpy as a kid when sleepy, so after a bit, I said out loud, "Hey, I'm trying to sleep." And the knock stopped. I was either oblivious or really brave as a kid, because I didn't feel scared or anything during that night or after. I knew it was strange and was into paranormal stuff, ghosts, and UFOs, but I didn't really think much of it. It's my only personal paranormal experience, and I've never gotten an explanation. Never had anything before or after since. Less creepy but terrifying, especially experiencing this. I have issues with standing too fast and tend to have to stand for a minute before continuing in a standing position. It's odd that my eyes go dark and my head just doesn't work. It's odd, I can't describe the feeling that well, but if you've experienced it, you know the feeling. It happens for about 30 seconds to a minute occasionally, and although I've talked to a doctor, there's not much I can really do at the moment to stop this. The possibility of me falling is a very real fear that arises from this issue. More often than not, I find myself pressing my arms on our walls to keep myself upright or death gripping the nearest sturdy object to prevent that. I only fell once because I had taken some medications that made me kind of out of it, but I was aware enough to prevent injury. The death grips I have are great. I stay upright because my hand feels no need to move. I do it unconsciously at this point, however, doing this to an open door was not a smart decision today. My mom had asked me to help her prepare some food, and I stand up. Usually, I can make it to my door before feeling as if I need to just take a minute to let my body adjust to standing. I got out of my door fine, so I thought I was fine. The feeling started in my head, it just felt airy and light, and I gripped my doorknob as best I could. I don't even remember falling, I didn't even feel myself falling, but my elbows hurt, and when I came, I was on the floor in the hallway, hearing my mom's concerned and frankly quite worried voice asking, "Are you okay? Did you just faint? What happened? Are you alright? Did you fall?" Followed by her walking out of the kitchen to see me on the floor with a well-deserved OSHT slipping from her mouth. I got up, got into a sitting position on the floor, and said, "I'm alright, I'm okay. I think I did fall, but I'm okay." The fact that this is the second time I've fallen victim to this issue is worrying, but it's also not something that I believe needs more attention than it's already getting. Though I'm still worried that this may happen again, I was lucky this time by being clear of any sort of wardrobe or sharp objects, but next time I may not be as lucky. If this happens again, I'm going to go to the doctor to check out what's going on and attempt to pursue this a lot more seriously and try and find out what this is so I can prevent it in the future. I never fainted before but never had a seizure either. I'm assuming I fainted, but regardless, both could be a result of or cause my fall, but blood pressure did definitely have a role to play in this incident. A truly terrifying experience. When I was in my teens, I used to scuba dive, mostly in Florida. At 14, my family went on a vacation to Washington, and I had the opportunity to go on a night dive. We went down 70 feet into the Puget Sound. About halfway through the dive, the guide and I stumbled into a Humboldt squid. These things are hellspawn. They're massive, extremely aggressive, and cannibalistic, and their suckers are lined with hooks used to tear flesh. They've been known to travel in groups of up to 1,200 individuals. That's a literal underwater army. This thing came right up to us and hovered by us 3 times before it finally lost interest. I had to remind myself to keep breathing as it did, and I kept thinking that the bubbles would piss it off and it would attack me. I also kept thinking that there might have been dozens swimming around us, just out of sight. On my 14th birthday, one of my friends at school that day wrote "Happy Birthday, insert nickname here" on a small piece of paper, and I kept it in my phone case for a while. I obviously got rid of that piece of paper along with that phone case and forgot about it for years. Fast forward to the morning of my 18th birthday. I wake up to get ready for work. I start at 6 and no one else is awake, and the smack bang center of my drawing is this piece of paper. I would have known if I put it there, and no one else in my home ever knew about that or got up early enough to place it there if they had. The paper also looked like it had barely even been folded. It was in great condition considering I haven't seen it in over 3 years. As soon as I got home from work, I begged everyone to tell me who did it, but no one ever fessed up. I still can't explain it. I was woken up by my wife screaming, "What the fuck was that?" I shoot up and see her staring toward the window. I immediately thought she saw some movement through the slits of the blinds or a shadow of someone creeping around since our house is only a single story. I jump up and ask her what she saw, and she just keeps staring at the window, sitting up perfectly in bed. I keep trying to ask her what she saw, if there was someone outside, or if she heard someone trying to break in. She stayed silent the whole time, and after 4 to 5 times asking her what she saw or heard, she just goes, "Oh, nothing," and just lays back down and is completely asleep. My heart was racing, and I was wide awake from the adrenaline rush of thinking someone was trying to get in the window because of how scared she sounded and how loud she yelled. I was just standing in the room in the dark, wide awake, after this maybe 20-second ordeal. It took 2 hours before I was able to fall back asleep, and when I asked her about it the next day, she had zero recollection of it. When my wife and I were searching for our first house, we didn't have much money and, as a result, looked at a lot of real dives before, thankfully, finding the nice place we eventually bought. One place in particular really stands out. We'd been driving all over the map all day, looking at different listings with our agent. We were about to call it quits for the day when she found one more place in our range. It was a bit of a drive, but we decided to go have a look. It was dark by the time we got there, but we figured we'd at least get a look inside. Right off the bat, the electricity was either shut off or didn't work. This was in the pre-cell phone days, so the 3 of us went through this place with our agent's almost dead flashlight. If I had to guess, I'd say an elderly person lived alone in the house until they passed. Everything, from the carpet to the furniture and remnants of a life left behind, was straight out of the 60s and 70s and in pretty bad shape. Lol, we probably decided this wasn't the one as soon as we walked through the front door, but we tried to keep an open mind and see the place for how it could be all fixed up. I wanted to take a look in the basement, which turned out to be a cross between a Michigan basement and a crawl space. I opened up a hatch in the floor and climbed down on a ladder I thought would snap into a pile of kindling any second. The agent handed me her light, and I slowly panned around the room. Right about the time I thought I'd seen everything there was to see, the flashlight illuminated a single wooden chair in a corner, with an ancient Winnie the Pooh plush sitting in it, pointed straight in my direction. The combination of my slow brain not processing what it was at first and the reflection of its glass eyes scared the living shit out of me. It was like something out of a cheesy horror movie, but it had the desired effect. When I got past the initial shock, I realized there were old toys scattered all over the floor. What really weirded me out was the idea that kids hadn't been playing on the main floor but rather down in this nasty, unlit crawl space. Sure gave me the creeps, and no, we did not make an offer. The last month has completely changed my belief in the supernatural. I went to Mexico with some friends, had a really good time, and when I returned home, I live alone, I was super tired, so I took a nap during the day. May 25th. I woke up after a couple of hours and felt the weight of somebody laying next to me in bed. I was startled and confused, and I reached over and felt a smooth woman's leg, at least I think it was a woman. By the time my hand makes contact with the thigh, I feel its arms start to attack me, pressing down on my upper chest. I push up on the forearms as they push down on me. It was like a 15 to 30 second struggle. Then it vanishes and is nowhere to be seen. I immediately leave the house, and I am absolutely terrified. When I return home later, I notice the sheets on the corner of my bed near the wall completely came off, which is very unusual since these sheets have never come off the bed before, like ever. It seemed like someone was lying there on that side. I still have pictures. A week passes with no more issues until I wake up to blood all over my sheets and pillowcase, soaking through to the pillow. I don't appear to be bleeding from anywhere, nose, ear, no cuts. Didn't make sense. I again took pictures. My friend is now in the mental hospital and says he's experiencing the same thing. He's not doing so well, but then again, neither am I. There's a lot more that has happened, especially in the last few days, but it would take too long to write a book out of everything that has happened. A couple of days ago, I went out of town again with a different friend, and we stayed at a hotel in a new town I'd never been to before. We arrived late, around 1130 at night. Absolutely exhausted and had to sleep. All of a sudden, I was woken up at 6:30 by the hotel room phone. I rush out of bed to answer, but nobody is there. It rings again, but I don't answer it. My friend heard it too. I go to the front desk and ask if they have called, and they say no. Later that day, I go to sleep during the day, again, while my friend walks around the city to explore. I vaguely remember him coming back to the room and laying down in the other bed to sleep, or so I thought. I remember looking at a figure laying in the bed across from me. Then I was attacked again by a hand firmly choking my throat. Absolutely terrifying stuff. I was leaving a restaurant I used to work at. I left the back door to the alley. I was walking down the alley, and they were going to turn down the side street I lived on. When I turned onto the side street, a young woman was coming down the side street, so when I turned the corner from the alley, I was just a few feet behind her. She didn't notice me at first, but after about a block, she turned back and noticed me. It was late at night and also winter, so we were both wearing big jackets and winter hats. After noticing me, she started to walk a little faster. I realized she was trying to separate herself from me, so I slowed down. I feel bad that she has to feel like this. So I decide to cross the street as I walk, so she will hopefully feel more comfortable. When I am just a few feet into the road, she also starts to cross. She looks back my way and starts to run. I stop under a street light and wait a few minutes so she can get far away. So the creepiest thing I've ever seen is me, and I'm really not creepy at all, but this woman has no idea. In college, early 2000s, some friends and I were returning home from a road trip. It was dark, and we'd pulled into this tiny town in the middle of nowhere for a pit stop. The town had very few lights. It was very eerie. When I stepped out of the car, I was overwhelmed with fear. Being a woman, it's not that uncommon to feel scared in a dark and unfamiliar place, but this was different. I was paralyzed with fear. I knew we were unsafe. I looked to my friends for reassurance, but all four of us, 2 men and 2 women, had done exactly what I did. I stepped out of the car and became overwhelmed with fear and dread. I can't even explain what was happening. It felt like something was watching us, but not like an animal or a person. Like a large entity, it felt like being surrounded by a presence, and it was not a kind presence. My muscle fibers, bones, and very soul were screaming with terror. Without even speaking, we all got back into the car and sped away. We were stopped for all of 30 seconds. None of us saw anything. It was all just a feeling. It was so creepy. I still wonder what happened that night. When I was about 9 years old, my family was in church, and it came time for the ushers to pass around the basket to collect the money. Someone or something whispered into my ear, "Get ready to put money into the basket when the man comes by." I assumed it was my mom, but I don't actually remember her whispering in my ear. I just heard someone whisper. As the usher came closer, my mom wasn't getting any money out of her purse or doing anything to get money. Finally, the usher is right there, so I tug on my mom's dress and loudly say, "Give me the money, Mom, so I can put it in the basket like you said." Embarrassed, she immediately grabbed my hand and pushed me down until I sat down on the pew. She then turned to me and angrily scolded me, "Now you just sit there and be quiet." The usher passed, and she gave no money. When church was over and we were in the car, I got in huge trouble. I tried to explain what happened, saying, "You told me to get ready and that you would give me the money." She insisted that she said no such thing and said I was a liar and should never lie, certainly not in church. My dear siblings, always up for throwing one under the bus, were like, "Yeah, Mom, he's a big fat liar." I don't remember what the punishment was when we got home, I just know it sucked. I remember that I was bummed that she didn't believe me, but that really isn't what freaked me out. My mom was not a liar, and by the way she reacted, I am sure that she didn't whisper in my ear. I was sitting at the edge of the pew next to my mom with my siblings to the left of her, so she was the only one who could have whispered in my ear, but it wasn't her. All these years later, I still remember this incident plain as day and ask myself the same thing I asked myself then. If it wasn't my mom, who or what whispered in my ear? Today, I am pretty sure it was a ghost or spirit with a sense of humor. There's really no other rational explanation. I was leaving the hospital, and when I arrived at my car, this guy was sitting in his car, which was parked next to mine. He had his window rolled down and was saying, "You're beautiful, you're beautiful. Can I take you out for coffee? I've been looking for someone like you. I could kiss you all over, you're beautiful. ACK. One response I gave him was, "No, I have to get to class." I was in college at the time, and he asked if I could just skip class. What do you think of that? But I did not give in to him. A few years or so afterward, I was working as a night shift porter at a truck stop. This one trucker would come in some nights, and like that creepy dude in the hospital parking lot, he'd repeatedly tell me, "You're so gorgeous," and other similar comments. Once he asked me if I had a boyfriend, and when I said I didn't, he asked if I wanted one. Another time after that, he said to me, "I have an idea." I asked, "What?" And he replied, "You could be my wife." I replied, "No, thank you." The creep then said, "I'd take care of you." To which I responded, "I have no desire for marriage or any other relationship," and was able to immediately walk away from him. I pointed the creep out to a couple of my coworkers, who then notified the manager when he arrived in the morning. I used to go hunting a lot. I got a lot of deer, squirrels, rabbits, and groundhogs. I would get home from school and get the cows fed, and the milking would start enough for me to go on a quick hunt. In the fall, I would take my 1100 Remington and hunt for squirrels. Sometimes it would just get dark on my way back to the barn. This one evening, I was walking my fairly regular route in the woods. It was up the old logging trail to the field that was the old pear orchard, where there was just one pear tree left, and then up to the next field, where there was only one apple tree left in the old apple orchard. Then I would skirt back across the top of the hollow over the pear orchard, making a loop to go to the highest point of our property and back down to the logging road. Up on the top of that hollow, there was a dense thicket of underbrush and saplings that had grown up after recent logging just over the property line, so there is a spot where visibility is reduced. This evening, as I got to the pear orchard, I thought I saw a deer at the bottom of the hollow run straight up the hollow. As I walked to the next field, I kind of felt like there was something walking in the woods near me. I thought it might be a deer, but I couldn't see anything. I got to the apple orchard and started up the ridge to cut across the hollow. I still felt something was nearby, and I heard something crashing through some thick leaf litter. I waited and watched so long that it was just starting to get dark. Hunting was over, so now it was going to just be a walk back home, but I kept my usual route. I got to the thicket of saplings, and I heard breathing. The only things large enough in those woods could have been a deer, a cow, or a very rare bear. Suddenly, something parted the brush and came right out of the thicket, right for me. It was standing on two legs, about 10 feet tall. It had wide antlers, a face like flesh was rotting off of it, and it was swinging its arms at me. I pulled up my shotgun as I stepped backwards to get away from it. Just as I fired, I fell backwards over a small branch on the ground. The shot went high through the antlers, and I saw something fall to the ground. It ran away, and where it was standing was a little bit of shredded clothing. I had heard stories of these things, but I never thought they were real. When I turned 18, I moved into a tiny little bachelor-style apartment. This guy had turned a house into 5 apartments. The other tenants were kind of weird, but nice enough. This one older woman took a liking to me. She started popping by my apartment and asking me for rides and stuff, but I didn't mind. Anyways, the apartment was in a pretty fucked area, but I was 18 and it was cheap, so I didn't really care, until people started turning my doorknob in the middle of the night. I just kept my door locked and thought that was the end of it. The older lady ended up asking me if people were trying to get in at night, and I told her yes. She just stared at me for a minute with a blank stare and then left. I had assumed she was a little slow or something from the beginning, so I wasn't that weirded out. A couple weeks later, I stayed over at my brother's girlfriend's house for the night, and when I got home, my retainer went missing. I was wearing it every night religiously at this point, and I left it on the same shelf in my bathroom every day when I wasn't wearing it. I started panicking because it would cost me like $500 to replace it, and I turned my bathroom upside down looking for it. Days went by, and it was still gone. My mom ended up calling me a week or so later, and I missed the call. Then she started blowing up my phone with calls and texts asking if I was okay. I called her back, asking why she was panicking, and she said because my voicemail changed to a woman saying, "She's gone, she's not answering the phone." I got pretty creeped out and went to change my voicemail, but my recorded message was still the same on my phone. I was pretty freaked out at this point, so I called my mom back and told her I was going to buy a little camera to put in my apartment so I'd feel safer. When I got back from buying the camera, my retainer was in the sink in its case, not on the shelf or by the sink, but in the sink. The woman stopped coming by my apartment, the doorknob stopped being turned in the middle of the night, and I moved out a couple months later once I got a better job and could afford something nicer. I still have no idea what was happening or what someone would even gain from taking my retainer and returning it. I'm assuming the weird old lady next door was messing with me or breaking in, but I can't imagine she would be tech savvy enough to hack a voicemail. We were driving down to my sister's wedding. My dad and I are in one car, and mom and another sister are in the other, a mile or two behind. We were on the PCH in a fairly remote area. Dad and I stopped where we are supposed to reconnect with mom and wait. They had been a mile or two behind us, but it took them far too long to arrive. They finally pulled in, stopped, and just sat in the car, blankly looking at us. As we got closer, we could see they had very odd expressions on their faces. When Dad asked them what delayed them, they got kind of excited and said they saw these strange lights in the sky. They seemed confused when asked to describe them, and Sis said the lights came over the car. They were visibly shaken and confused, they couldn't tell us what delayed them, and they seemed to be in shock or something. They were just behind us, 45 minutes late, and there was no explanation. They could never account for that time they lost and just get weird AF when trying to talk about it. To this day, if I ask about it, they both get that same odd expression and, again, the odd confusion and almost stammering. This is now 30 years later, and it still makes the hair stand up on my neck. We have no idea what happened to them, nor do they. My sister had a camera in her room growing up because she was going through some things while we tried to get a diagnosis. She was hearing things, seeing things, and absolutely terrifying the shit out of me as an 11-year-old. Well, one night, she claimed she had been slapped in the face. We didn't believe her but decided to just watch the footage to see if we could see anything. I don't remember the time, but it was late at night, and she was lying in bed. I don't believe she was asleep. We saw something blurry and gray/white fly over the end of her bed from the middle of the room to the other side of the bed, which was about 2 out from the wall. There is not enough room for anyone to even walk between. As soon as it made its way across the bed to between the bed and wall, she sat straight up and began looking at the end of the bed to see what it was. As she was sitting there, her pillow was slowly pulled off the bed towards the wall, where there was no room for anyone to hide. Not even a small child. We watched it be dragged until it fell. She went to lay down and realized her pillow was gone. She reached over the side of the bed between the bed and wall, picked it up, and put it back in place before laying down again. She just casually went back to sleep. I still have no idea how. She's schizoaffective now, in her early 30s, and sees and hears things regularly. She very clearly has hallucinations. But there's no way that was a hallucination. My mom and I both saw it. We still talk about it today, and it happened 15 plus years ago. I was a somewhat troubled kid, and I used to spend summers with my great aunt and her husband, whom I just called my aunt and uncle in the early to mid 2000s. They lived in this plantation-style house that was built in the 1800s, and it had a reputation for being haunted. Sometimes ghost tours would stop by the house, though none stopped by while I was there. The first summer I stayed there, I was staying in one of the bedrooms that a little girl had died in shortly after the house was built. It was a documented thing, as the original owner was a state senator, and there tends to be records for those types of things, and the little girl's mother died the following night in the room across the hall. One night I was watching TV in my room, and it started getting pretty late, and nothing on TV was interesting, so I turned off the TV to go to sleep. Since it was one of my first nights there, my aunt would sometimes drop by my room to check in on me to see if I needed anything. This particular night, I heard footsteps coming down the hall toward my room, and they stopped just outside my room, and the door opened slightly. I waited to hear her voice, but 30 seconds or so passed and she hadn't said anything, so I said something like "I'm fine," but I still didn't hear anything. Thinking this might be my uncle playing pranks, and not willing to just not know who was outside the door, I got up and walked to the doorway, but the door opened even more. Nobody was there. The next morning I told my uncle what happened, hoping he would say that he was playing pranks or that he remembered my aunt getting up to check on me, but instead he told me, "You'll probably have a few more experiences like that while you're here, but probably not anything overly alarming." I lived there for 2 or 3 more summers and had a few more odd experiences, but nothing really like that one night. Something about the footsteps and their ending right at my door unsettled me. My first bipolar psychotic episode and hallucinations. I was playing a horror game, Fatal Frame 2, and it was incredibly manic, although I didn't know what was going on as I hadn't been diagnosed. I suddenly had the urge to clean the whole house, so I turned my game off, went into the kitchen, and got to work. After a bit, I started hearing sounds from the game I'd been playing. I thought maybe I didn't actually turn it off or something, and it was playing through the opening or something. But I suddenly became absolutely terrified and knew the ghost had come out of the game and was in the living room. I got up the courage to go look, trying to tell myself that it was absolutely insane to think that. She was standing at the end of the hallway, in the doorway to my bedroom. Full color, covered in blood, and saying things from the game to me. I was absolutely paralyzed with fear. Part of me knew it wasn't real, which was almost the worst part because I knew that I'd gone insane. I called different family members for help, and none of them came to help me. My sister just told me to take some Xanax and go to bed, but I couldn't get to my room because the ghost was laughing at me from the door. I ended up taking several Xanax and fell asleep curled up on the kitchen counter until my mom came home. Not me but my grandma, a late night when my grandma, her sister, and brother were in bed. They lived in a 2-story house on a hill with a field on the left side of their house. Anyway, they were hearing noises downstairs, and I can't remember who went into the room they were hearing the sounds in, but they went in the room and found all the drawers open and the room that looked trashed. If I remember right, she said her brother and sister didn't have the courage to go tell their dad. Her dad checked it out. But later that night, my grandma and her sister were hearing sounds late at night. They looked out the window and saw a flying saucer land in the field to the left of the house, and they were frozen with fear. I can't remember if she said it was before or after, but I think it was after. She saw a little green man come out, and then they were scared to look, and the man and the saucer were gone. What makes the story even creepier is that my grandma never told anyone about it and thought it was a dream. My uncle, who was there, ended up killing himself. My grandma and her sister got together and started talking about his life and their childhood. My grandma told the story as if it were a dream. My aunt said to my grandma, her name, that wasn't a dream, it was real me. You and uncle's name, all saw that. It still creeps me out to this day. I've experienced a few ghost stories. Anyway, there was this house built in the 1800s out in farm country, in the Midwest. The original owner of the house that built it had committed suicide in one of the upstairs bedrooms with a shotgun. My cousin and I knew these 2 girls were living and renting out this house. They were too afraid to go to sleep there by themselves after some activity in the house. So all 4 of us went. I was shown upstairs and left alone for a bit. Nothing too spooky. Except the original room the guy had killed himself in was locked, and no one knew what was in there or had a key to get in. We all went to sleep on the living room floor. At about 1 to 2 a.m., I hear footsteps coming down the stairs, creaking the floorboards. The stairs lead right into the living room in front of us. The door to the stairs never opened. But then I heard the footsteps cross to a touch lamp that turned on, then the TV turned on, the VHS tape was pushed in, and the movie started to play. I looked over to my left, and one of the girls was awake, wide-eyed, looking at me. She hid under the blankets. I sat in silence for about 20 seconds before I said out loud, "We're trying to sleep. Can you turn that all off, please?" Sure enough, the VCR turned off, the TV turned off, the lamp turned off, and the footsteps went back upstairs. I was walking home late at night from a friend's house. It was only a 7-block walk, but I had to walk past an abandoned factory building and then a dead-end road that just cuts off at the edge of the woods. No one was out or about that I could see. It was like 3 a.m. I'd just gotten to the old factory when I heard random whistling somewhere up ahead. It was definitely human whistling, but it had no real melody or pattern. It was just a lot of random notes. As I got further past the factory, the whistling sounded closer. I was near the dead-end road at this point. When I looked around the corner of that dead-end road, I saw this person standing at the end, almost in the woods. They were crouching, then standing up, then bobbing around, then rocking back and forth. There was a white light coming from the middle of their forehead, too. I assumed it was someone with a headlamp out looking for a lost dog or something. I couldn't really see any detail other than the light on their head, just a black human shape. Either way, I edged a little closer and started to ask if they needed any help. The movements and whistles stopped. They looked like they turned around toward me, but somehow I still couldn't see any detail on them, like I couldn't even discern a face, clothing, or skin color, and my immediate instinct was to back away slowly. So I did. When I took my first few steps backward, they took a few toward me. Wordlessly. We faced each other in silence for a few seconds before I whirled around to run the rest of the way to the next block, so I could get back under some street lights. While I ran, I heard footsteps jogging up behind me. I made it to the next block and ran under the lights. When I turned to look behind me, there was no one there. The jogging sounds had stopped. The figure I'd been running from was nowhere to be seen. When I was a kid, especially before the age of 10, I would sometimes get night terrors, usually because I was dehydrated from being outside all day. 99% of the night terrors I had, I couldn't remember what happened or what I was thinking. One time, for example, I slept over at a friend's house and had a night terror. I asked my friend's mom if she was going to kill me. I didn't even remember talking to her that night. But there is one night terror that I do remember very vividly and that even gave me hallucinations. I was 7 at the time, and I woke up in the middle of the night from very vivid dreams, perhaps the only time I can remember experiencing inception. I try to open my eyes, and then I realize I can't. I can't move my legs or my arms, nothing. I had full-on sleep paralysis, and this is where the creepy experience starts. I felt something hop on my bed and start jumping up and down, and it even started laughing like a clown. I didn't open my eyes or anything, I just laid there terrified. It eventually stops, and I can move again. I get out of bed and head to my parents' room, which is upstairs. As I'm walking up the stairs, I notice my sister's Raggedy Ann doll on the floor. I see this doll get on 2 legs and start dancing in front of me for about 5 seconds, moving its arms like a worm and moving its hips side to side. I can't move again, I can't breathe, and I'm just staring, hoping it stops. As soon as it stopped, I had feeling in my body again and ran to my parents' door. The only problem was that they had it locked that night. I just slept on the floor at their door that night. I was 14 years old, lying on my stomach on the floor of my bedroom. I would lock my door to keep my young nephews from walking into my room without warning. As I'm reading, I hear a sound from behind me. It sounded like someone was breathing. There was a window behind me, so I figured someone was right outside or something, so I ignored it. As I flipped through the pages of my magazine, the sound began to grow closer and louder. It crept up closer to the back of my neck, making my hair stand up and triggering the weird tickling feeling that sounds that are too close to my ears cause. At this point, I was so afraid that I couldn't have turned around, even if I'd wanted to. This is the only time I've ever been scared frozen. I was so frightened that I couldn't even scream or anything. The breathing was so close to my ear that I could feel it. I was eventually able to muster up a scream and start calling for my mom. I couldn't form words, I just screamed as loud as I could. My mom got to the door pretty fast, but my door was locked. She somehow managed to get the door open, and without even asking me what was wrong, she threw a blanket over me, picked me up, and ran out of the room. She carried me to the living room, warning my little nephews not to go in there. I told her what happened. She didn't say much about it after that, but I wasn't allowed back into my room for a couple days. I have no idea what it was or if my mom even knows, either. That frozen in fear feeling was the most uncomfortable sensation. 2 winters ago, I was watching the northern lights with my dog. It was about -25 degrees Celsius, maybe -30 degrees Celsius at the coldest. I was sitting on a snow-covered table, and eventually the cold got through to me. By this point, I was out there for an hour and a half, and while the lights are pretty and I enjoy the quiet, once you watch them for 30 minutes, it's good enough. So anyway, I go over to the door and whistle to call my dog in. She still wanted to play in the snow, so she was taking her time. Instead of hearing her trot towards me in the snow, I heard something large moving quite quickly behind my fence, heading towards my driveway. I could hear the hardened snow cracking beneath its feet. It was the distinct sound of compact snow giving way. I'm spooked by this point, so I call my dog once again, and she comes running in. I checked the next morning to see if there were any hoof prints because it sounded moose-sized, but no moose tracks were there. There were coyote tracks, deer tracks, my tracks, the normal, just nothing large enough to fit the sound. I now fully believe in the superstition about whistling at night. Whatever was rapidly approaching is not something I wish to encounter again in the cold and dark. If my whistling spooked it, I don't want to do that again. If my whistling attracts it, I want it to stay the hell away from me. My oldest brother died at age 39 in 2016, and I had flown into town to stay with family as we prepared for his celebration of life. I was sleeping in my aunt's basement, which is connected to her laundry room and also has some storage and a small wine room. At about midnight, getting ready to fall asleep, my then fiancé and I were startled by a loud pop and crash. We went into the wine room, and there was a bottle of red wine that had popped and was emptying onto the floor. We went and grabbed my aunt and brought her down to show her, and upon closer inspection, we realized that there were trails of wine dripping down the sides of the bottle to its bottom. The creepiest thing about this, though, was that the bottle was stored with the cork end at a downward angle toward the floor, so there is no earthly reason the wine would be able to defy gravity like that. And the trails of wine were completely dry. The very next day, I placed a newly purchased single lily in a small vase on the kitchen counter. Totally healthy and thriving. Immediately after putting it in the vase, I stepped out of the kitchen, spent literally 5 seconds grabbing something from the adjacent dining room, and when I got back into the kitchen, every single petal of that flower was on the floor. Only the stem was left in the vase. When my other brother passed away in 2014 at the age of 35, 2 years prior, I was in that same basement, actually sleeping this time. A set of golf clubs that had been there for months in the corner of the room, and nobody had gone anywhere near them, came crashing down in the middle of the night. I didn't even look to see what it was. I shot off that damn couch and sprinted up the stairs like effing Usain Bolt. Needless to say, I really don't like sleeping in her basement.